Hallelujah. Clap our hands for the Lord for this beautiful morning, our last day of our conference, Ministry worship to God. Just to encourage you with the Word of God, in Ephesians it says, and this is my prayer, Ephesians 6 verse 9, and this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So everything that we do, to summarize it, it is for the glory and the praise of our God. So let us just give back all the glory to Him and let us praise the Lord. Praise and glorify our God. Praise and glorify our God, for we believe the word. And through our faith we have a seal, the Spirit of the Lord. The Spirit guarantees our hope until we touch His love. We join in
taste your kindness, when we see your face. We'll sing, we'll know, like we've never known before. We'll be found, we'll be home, we'll be yours forevermore. All the waiting will be over, every sorrow will be healed. All the dreams that seem could never be will all be real. And you'll gather us together in your arms of endless grace, as your bride forever. When we see your we'll sing, we'll know, like we've never known before. We'll be found, we'll be home, we'll be yours forevermore. We'll sing,
Even though
we'll
before you know,
like we've
no
never
eyes seen, no ears heard,
before.
God has prepared.
We'll be glad, we'll be home, we'll be yours forevermore. And you gather us together in your arms of endless grace, as your bride forever. When we see your face.
Oh Lord, what a day that will be when we see your face. Lord, in that moment we will know what it is to experience no more pain, no more suffering, no more sickness or illness, no more sin. Lord, we'll be in perfect paradise. We'll be able to enjoy new bodies that won't be broken anymore. We'll be able to see and hear and run in glorious perfection. Lord, we'll be gathered from people from every tribe and language and nation. There'll be angels in the heavenly realms and people that have gone before us. But more than anything, Lord, the greatest joy will be the reality that you are. We will see your face. Lord, the reality is we are all foreigners here. We're all aliens here. We're all sojourners. But when we see your face, we'll be home. We'll be where we truly belong, where it all makes sense. Lord, would you help us to live our lives gazing at your face? And would you help us to live each day in reality of what is to become? We have been born again to a living hope. This is not our home. You are our home. Lord, help us to live for that day. Help us to run passionately and hard for that day, where there not be left anything on the field of this earth, when we give our energies and risk our all to move towards you. And we do it for your glory. on sadly to the last day of our conference, which is always sad. You feel like you've only just started. And all of a sudden, you're looking at your last day. A couple of announcements for you though. First of all, we do a Sovereign Grace Missions newsletter, which is on the screen. If you want, I'll get Elaine to put that up at the end and leave it there. If you actually point your phones at that thing in the middle, it'll actually take you to a sign-up so that you can get the newsletter from all the stuff that happens around the world. You know, what God is doing in Asia, in His kindness, He's actually doing all over the world in our family churches. I wish I could take you all with me to Latin America or Africa or wherever we are in Europe. It's just amazing to see what the Lord is doing. And this newsletter will just help you understand what's happening in our family churches around the world. It's obviously free, and we send that out. You're often in it. You're able to see yourselves. That's what I do when the newsletter comes out. Even though I write it, I'm looking for myself somewhere. How can I begin it? And so yeah, you can get that. Also, people have been asking, are we going to do this like every year? The Sovereign Grace Asia Pacific Pastors Conference. We're actually thinking of planning to do it every 2 years. So it'll be biannually that we're looking to do this. But then in the off years, so next year, we are looking to do a conference. We're going to be looking to do a Worship God conference in March of next year. Yes. We're looking to, Bob Coffin's going to be coming over with Deborah Coffin and Dave Zimmer. We're going to be bringing a team over. We're going to be doing hopefully 2. We'll do one in Manila and one in Cebu, back to back like we did many years ago. So please be excited about that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We have no pulling power, but you like Bob, and then people want to come. Yes, exactly. Applaud. Nadine is very happy that it says Cebu on it. Yes. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So the way it's going to work, you know, and it might change, but the way we're thinking it through at this point is every other year there'll be an Asia Pacific Pastors Conference. And then in the off years, we'll do a Worship God conference. Or we're thinking about doing a Young Adults conference for Asia and to try to hit our 18s through 30s and gather together and enjoy each other in that range as well. Well, I now have the privilege of introducing Andrew Lung to you. Andrew is on staff with me in Australia. He's one of our pastoral candidates. He's going through his ordination at the moment. You know, I'm only able to travel around the world and do what I do for Sovereign Grace churches because of men like Andrew that are willing to stay home. If they're not willing to stay in Sydney and serve the church that I'm in, then I can't do what I do. And I'm definitely a pastor first and then a traveller second. You know, I have a group of sheep like you do, who I dearly love. And Andrew's one of the men that gives himself to serving Sovereign Grace Church of Sydney. Andrew first got involved actually serving with me about 5 years ago when we were running a retreat. And I was just encouraging people ready to live for Jesus and to be all out for Jesus, and who knows what he might do. And Andrew came to me after that in tears, affected, and had really felt the Lord had asked him to give a day a week up of his job for free, just to serve Sovereign Grace Church Sydney and Sovereign Grace Churches Global and help me. Now he's in a position where he's pursuing pastoral ministry, and I'm so pleased to be able to introduce him. So Andrew, why don't you come up and tell us about it?
Well, hello and good morning, everybody. Good morning. Well, it's great to be here. My name's Andrew. So as Dave introduced myself, I'm a pastoral candidate at Sovereign Grace Church in Sydney, in Wahroonga, and I have the joy of serving alongside Dave. It's been a privilege. So just to begin with, a little fun fact about Australia. According to recent government census, nearly 20%, that's nearly 1 in every 5 persons of Australians identify themselves as having Asian ancestry. So within the pastoral team at City Wahroonga, we actually have an even higher Asian representation, with 2 out of 4 of a pastoral team being of Asian descent. Yes. I like to call it domination. Now, I can pull that off because it's an Asia Pacific conference. I wouldn't do that in Australia. Well, truly, it's a joy and a privilege to be here amongst you all, fellow saints, fellow servants in our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's been a rich time the last few days, just catching up with just a few of you, just to hear stories of how God is at work in the churches that you serve, and to hear of stories how you faithfully and courageously serve our King, Lord Jesus Christ. And so my heart is warm, my heart is full, and just to hear of these stories. And, the gospel that came 2,000 years ago onto this earth continues this day. The gospel is unstoppable, and just to hear your stories, it's relentless in its advance, and it's such a joy to be able to partner with you all the way from Sydney, Australia, and to be counted amongst and standing next to you all. So, a little about how I kind of got involved with Sovereign Grace in Sydney. So, Sovereign Grace Sydney was the first church planted in Australia. That's when Pastor Dave, in 2010, uprooted his young family and came to Australia all the way from Wales in the United Kingdom. And that was the first church in Sydney. I joined the church shortly after in January 2011. So a couple of months after the church started. And back then I was working full-time in the finance world. And one of the things that struck me when I came to the church in Sydney was the joy of the people, how the gospel affected people. And it kind of worked itself out in the joy, in the worship. But as I got to know the people in the church, it was the gospel and how it functioned as the center of our lives, how the gospel bears fruit in the marriage relationships, how the gospel bore fruit in parenting relationships, in how people related to each other. Everything was rooted back to the gospel. And that was something that was very, very refreshing for me. And upon joining Sovereign Grace, it actually coincided with one of the times when I walked through one of the darkest valleys of my life. Upon joining Sovereign Grace, my then wife left that relationship within 6 months of joining Sovereign Grace. And so I had to walk through a journey where the Lord had me to really question, is my faith for it? Is He good to me in this time of grief and in this time of suffering? And thanks be to God, by His grace, and through the church at Sovereign Grace and through what the Sovereign Grace really taught, people kept pointing me up. Don't look around you, keep looking up. And God's word was sweeter in my life than it ever had been. And though I don't wish that episode to be landed upon anyone, at the same time, the Lord used that and worked a work in my life. And I walked away with two things. One thing was that I didn't deserve anything, yet the Lord gave His Son to me. And the second thing was that all I needed was Him and the church around me. There is nothing else. Even if the world around me crumbled, I have Him and I have these people of God around me. I am a happy, content man. And so that was the effect of Sovereign Grace on me. And so that changed my trajectory in life. And over the years, by His grace, through the faithful preaching of the pastoral team, I just grew in my love for the Lord and for the Saviour. And I just served however way the Lord wanted me to, just playing a part in the local church there. And just to be able to help others experience what I experienced personally. And so as Dave said before, in God's providence over the last couple of years, just sense the Lord kind of calling me towards pastoral ministry. And also just run that off, the Lord's kind enough to bless me with my current wife, and we've got 3 kids at the moment. At the moment. Yes. Thank you. Is that prophetic? Well, it's been a privilege to have watched Sovereign Grace Australia grow all the way from it being planted in 2010, and over the years to see many people share in and value what I've experienced, the beauty and the treasure that is the gospel. So after the first church was planted in 2010, the second church was planted in 2019 in Sovereign Grace Parramatta under the leadership of Riley Springs. And then during the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021, when seemingly everything was kind of on a standstill, but God was continuing to be on the move as He called and trained up, preparing people to be called and trained up for ministry, myself included. So in 2022, Sovereign Grace Australia ran the Pastors and Planters Academy, and a total of 5 men participated in it, and that involved taking a day off their full-time job work to be developed and help us to discern our call for pastoral ministry, looking at all things theology and character. And in God's kindness, 4 of the 5 went on to serve in a pastoral capacity as either pastoral interns or pastoral candidates in 2023. So it's been a rich exercise of building pillars in the church. Now this year, in 2023, the Lord led SG Australia to continue focus on training leaders through the launch of the Young Leaders and internship across both Wollonga and Parramatta. And 11 young adults from between 18 to 30 took part. Men and women from both churches to be trained, devoting themselves to structured learning and ministry in the church. Isn't it great to be mobilizing a young generation of people developing a love for the Lord? And so we're praying that amongst them, that some may potentially be raised up as pastors and planters. So it's an exciting time to be in SG Australia, and we sense that God is just on the edge of unleashing the power of His gospel through these leaders and in raising the next generation. The future is bright because God is faithful in building His church. So please come along and pray for us in that. Well, in Australia, we're excited to be counted as one of you in the Asia Pacific region, and we are humbled to stand alongside you all. And it's joy to play our part, to partner with you to see the gospel expand in this part of the world. Hallelujah.
Thank you, Andrew, for that wonderful update. Thank you for your transparency and your humility as well. Just speaking about the challenges of your own life. And we're just so grateful for what you're doing in Australia, for the church, both churches in Australia that are part of what's happening in the Asia Pacific part of the world. And that's happening in part through the means of grace of Dave Taylor. Obviously, Jeff has carried the burden to pull off this conference to serve you, but what lies behind that is also Dave's heart for the Asia Pacific part of the world. And his announcement earlier to do a conference every other year, a Pastors and Wives Conference, and in those off years to do something like Worship God. That's all Dave's initiative and Dave's leadership. He carries you on his heart. He is excited about what is happening in gospel mission here in the Asia Pacific part of the world. And Dave, we just thank God for you. Can we just thank Dave? Yesterday we heard in a couple of testimonies, both by someone and by JP, that one of the things that they have enjoyed about our family of churches is how we prioritize family. How we prioritize marriage and the home. And that's very intentional on our part because, first of all, we believe that's biblical. We believe that the Lord teaches us to do that. It's a part of our qualification as pastors, that we would be men who love our wives well and lead our homes well and that our wives would just joyfully support what we're doing. But more importantly, you see a correlation between the health of a pastor's home and the health of his ministry. That's what you see consistently, very practically. And so I wanted to just take a moment, as I was praying a couple of days ago, taking a long walk and praying for our time, I just want to pray for our marriages. I want to pray for every married couple here, that God would bless it and pour His grace upon your marriage, that you would continue to grow. As I may have mentioned, I don't remember, Jill and I in May will be married 44 years. But we are still learning how to do marriage because we change as you get older. And she changes, and I'm sure I change. And I'm learning, okay, how do I adjust to serve her and to love her more? So it's a lifelong learning process, marriage, isn't it? Many of you are shaking your heads because you know what I'm talking about. So before we turn to our text in just a moment, I just want to pray. Lord, I thank you for every married couple in this room. They represent your sovereignty, that you have chosen to put them together as husband and wife. And I pray for them. I pray that you would grow them together. First of all, that you would grow them together in Christ. And I pray that you would strengthen their marriage in Christ. I pray that you would increase their love for one another, their affection for one another. Lord, I pray that you would deepen their devotion to one another. And I pray where at times we do have conflict, that you would give them grace to quickly work through conflict or disagreement, Lord. As I was praying a couple days ago, Lord just gave me the impression that maybe a married couple or two arrived here trying to work through a disagreement. And I just believe the Lord wants to help you. And that He's going to give you even good conversation before you leave this conference to continue to work out maybe the disagreement you're having. And He laid this verse on my heart, Ephesians 4:15. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. Lord, I pray for any couples that might be facing some strife. Give them grace to speak truth, but to speak it in love. Help them to tenderly and carefully and with listening ears listen to one another and talk with one another. And I pray that you would bring just reconciliation and resolution to any disagreement, Lord. And for all of us, Lord, help us to be husbands and help us to be wives who speak the truth to one another in love, especially when we disagree. Lord, we pray mostly that our marriages would be another means by which you reveal your glory. It's no accident that Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth of love, is written before Ephesians 5, that reveals this mystery, that a husband and wife's relationship is to reveal, to show the relationship that Christ has with this church. So do that, Lord, in each of our homes and in each of our marriages. And I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, you can turn to 1 Peter chapter 5, if you would. 1 Peter chapter 5. And as I have gotten to know you just over the last few days, and some of you I've just met, but as I've interacted with you, what I've found is that what I'm about to read, these first 4 verses we're going to read together and preach from, this text that speaks to elders. You men, you're embodying this. You're living this out. So I'm not preaching this because you need it. I see pastors who are being faithful to do what God has called them to do, and I see your wives right alongside of you helping you to do that. The secret weapon is in your life, helping you to do that. So thank you for being faithful pastors. Thank you for leading your church well. Thank you for pastoring your people like Christ pastors his people. And I tell you that because I find that pastors need encouragement. What pastors do and what their wives do in supporting them, it's hard. It can be hard work. It's a joy. This is a joyful occupation, vocation. But it can be difficult at times, and I find that most pastors and wives don't get enough encouragement. So I want to encourage you. What I'm about to read, what we're going to look at, you men and you women are doing. And I believe the Lord is pleased. All right, 1 Peter chapter 5. What we're going to do is look at this passage that talks about pastoral teams. If you'll notice right away that the term elder is in the plural. And that means that pastors are not intended to do ministry alone, but we're to do it with other pastors on pastoral teams. And the title of this sermon is The Pastor and His Team. And we're going to read 1 Peter 5, verses 1 through 4. This is Peter. So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. May God bless the preaching of his word. In April of 1989, the International Basketball Federation ruled that professional basketball players could play in international competition. This decision opened the door for the national Philippines basketball team to be assembled with their best basketball players in this nation to compete in the 1990 Asian Games in Beijing. Robert Sonny Jaworski was appointed the head coach. Are you familiar with his name? You are? Okay, good. He was appointed the head coach, and he chose Reno Salazar and Norman Black as his assistant coaches. He also chose Ramon Fernandez, a veteran professional player, as his team captain. Jaworski assembled a 12-man team comprised of the best professionals, men like Alan Sadiak? Katie. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. I'm sorry. All right. Benji Paras? All right. Benji. And Alvin Patrimonio, yes. But he also included players who were role players, who were familiar with his system. Men like Chito Loizaga, okay, and Dante Gonzalo. Okay, you know that. You're saying better than me. The team only had 2 weeks to prepare before the Asian Games began, and slowly Jaworski built them into a cohesive team. The Asian Games started, and they won their first game decisively against Pakistan. Ferris, I'm very sorry that Pakistan lost. Next up was the game against Japan. And in that game at halftime, the Filipino team was down by 14 points. Jaworski gave an impassioned exhortation to his team, not only calling them to play better, but giving them a specific strategy. And whatever he said at that halftime exhortation, it worked. Because the Filipino team came out and they went on a 22-point run, and they upset the Japanese team. That was an important win because it positioned them for a better seeding in the quarterfinals, and they won several more games, finding themselves in the championship game against China, where the 1990 Philippines basketball team won the silver medal. Yeah. See, I share that story with you because, like that halftime exhortation speech that Jaworski gave his team, Peter here in verses 1 through 4 is giving an exhortation. An exhortation not just to pastors, but to a team of pastors. Like Jaworski's timely exhortation, it was needed for them to win that game. This exhortation is timely because of the kind of suffering and pressures and persecution that the churches Peter was writing to was experiencing. We know that because Peter ends chapter 4 in verse 19 saying, "Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good." So for the church to suffer and continue to do the good work of gospel ministry, it needs to be led and cared for by pastors, a team of pastors. Which is why Peter's exhortation is both timely and necessary. Now, you probably noted in giving this exhortation, Paul begins it by giving actually a lengthy description of himself. He exhorts elders as a fellow elder. Now, he could have described himself as an apostle of Jesus Christ, and that would have been right, but he chose to describe himself as a fellow elder because it tells us that he could identify with the elders he was writing to and the pressures and the challenges they were facing. Peter also then writes that he is a witness of the sufferings of Christ. In keeping with the mood of this text, it means those who are witnesses for Christ, those who preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, they will be persecuted. And Peter experienced that persecution, didn't he? So again, he's identifying with the elders that he is writing to. And then he says this, that he is going to be a partaker of the glory that is going to be revealed, which is intended to impart hope to the pastors that he's writing to, because he knows their suffering and he knows about their trials. And one day, as we just sang, Jesus is going to come back and make all things new. And all of your suffering and all of your trials and all of the burdens that you brought to this conference, they're going to vanish as we see him face to face. Note that Paul is not just exhorting an individual elder, though. He exhorts a team of elders. We know that because the plural form of elders is used there in verse 1. Even though every pastor has a responsibility to shepherd the flock of God that is among us, we collectively as elders, as a team of elders, are to do that together and not alone. See, we shepherd and lead the church as a team of elders. So here's what I want to do with our time. I want to answer two questions. First of all, why team ministry? Why team ministry? And number two, what is a healthy plurality? What is a healthy plurality? So let's get to the first question. What is team ministry? So in answering that question, let's define what team ministry is. This is how I define team ministry. Team ministry is a plurality of elders who work together to pastor, serve, and lead the church of God. Let me just repeat that. Team ministry is a plurality of elders who work together pastor, serve, and lead the church of God. I say church of God because that's the language that we see there in verse 2. Peter writes, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. So we as pastors must be consistently mindful that the church is not our church. The church is not our church, but is the church of God, comprised of the people of God who have been purchased by the blood of Jesus Christ, who is the chief shepherd over the church. So, brother pastors, we have been given a responsibility to shepherd the church of God by Jesus Christ, and in serving our church, it is Christ that we must ultimately serve and please. He is the one that we must bring glory to. Now, I also define team ministry as a plurality of elders, because the plural term, again, is used in verse 1 as elders. In fact, if you look throughout the New Testament where we see any evidence of where a church or pastor is being referenced, it's always referring to elder. And elders must meet certain qualifications that we see in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. Most of those, as you know, are character qualifications that a plurality of men need to meet. You see, pastoral ministry is not intended to be done alone. It's intended to be done with a team of pastors. Now, think about this. Of all the people that could do ministry alone, most certainly that would be Jesus Christ, right? But he didn't do that. He chose 12 apostles with whom he did gospel ministry, one of them being Peter, who wrote these very words, who did team ministry with Jesus Christ. See, team ministry is important because it's a reflection of God's care and of God's wisdom for the church. In God's wisdom, he decided that a team of pastors would best serve his church. And so he writes in Scripture about a plurality of elders. Team ministry is important because the burdens that pastors carry in ministry, they're never intended by God for us to carry them alone, but we are to carry them together as a team of pastors. Team ministry is important because a pastor doesn't have to be gifted and have all the strengths in all areas. Rather, he is to do ministry with a team of men who are gifted where he's not gifted, who are strong where he is not strong. And as a result, most importantly, the church is better served and strengthened. See, team ministry is important because pastoral ministry, it feels very lonely at times, doesn't it? But when you're with a team, at least a team of men around you, it helps alleviate the loneliness that we can feel in ministry. See, these are just some of the reasons why team ministry is important and why team ministry has always been, and I pray will always be, a value in Sovereign Grace churches. We, by His grace, always want to be a family of churches that are led, our churches are led by a team of elders. See, team ministry is an expression of God's wisdom and care for the church. And when team ministry is healthy, and when it is functioning together in unity, the church is joyfully in strength and in unity as well. So that leads to the second question. What is a healthy plurality? What is a healthy plurality? Before answering that question, I want to recognize something, the biblical reality that teams need to be led so they can function efficiently, effectively, and in unity. The Philippines basketball team needed a coach, right? They needed Jaworski to lead them. Teams, any team, they need a man to lead them. And in Sovereign Grace, we see that man as the senior pastor or lead pastor. Our churches use different titles, but it essentially is a man who has been asked by the team to lead them, because all teams need leadership. Now, let me be very clear, and I'll say this again. The senior pastor does not have any greater authority. All elders have an equal authority. The senior pastor simply plays the role that the team recognizes that teams need leadership. And that is based on the biblical principle of first among equals. You see that throughout Scripture. For example, Moses led the 70 elders in Numbers chapter 11. Peter was the leader among the apostles, so it seems, because in Acts chapter 1, when they needed to replace Judas, it was Peter who sort of led the apostles to make a decision to replace him. James appears to be the leader of the church in Jerusalem. We see that in Acts chapter 15. So that's just a brief survey of where you see this principle of first among equals in Scripture. Again, as we will see, that doesn't mean that person has greater authority. Senior pastors, lead pastors, they don't have greater authority. He is simply given the responsibility to lead the team of elders and that team has asked them to lead them. So as we answer our question, what is a healthy plurality? I want to make some comments about the specific role of senior pastors, because if you're a senior pastor or a lead pastor, or maybe one day will be, I want you to understand how that works within team ministry. Okay, what is a healthy plurality? First of all, a healthy plurality is a qualified plurality. Number one, a qualified plurality. As I mentioned, men must meet 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 qualifications. Again, most of those being character qualifications to be an elder. It's also clear in our text here in 1 Peter chapter 5, in verses 2 and 3, that who an elder is, and what his motivations for ministry are, and how he fulfills those responsibilities is important for his leadership to be effective. See, how elders fulfill their responsibility as elders and the manner which they fulfill them is as important as the responsibilities themselves, because the manner with which they fulfill those responsibilities, it engenders trust. It helps people to trust you and your leadership as an elder. The first of those exhortations that Paul gives there is not under compulsion, but willingly. You see that in verse 2. And what he's saying is that a man should never be forced or compelled to be in pastoral ministry, but he should willingly and eagerly embrace that call to serve the people of God. Now, we read this in our day, and that may seem like an odd exhortation, right? In a day with more of an independent mindset that we have, well, nobody's going to force me into pastoral ministry, right? We can think that way. But we've got to keep in mind the context with which Peter wrote these words. You see, at that time, Peter's writing to churches who are facing real persecution, severe persecution, and severe trials and challenges. And therefore, pastoral ministry was not on the top 10 career choices list. You have to be out of your mind to be a pastor. That's the context that he's writing in. And for some of you, you understand those challenges. However, if a man was willingly and eager to step into the fray, to care for God's people, even in the midst of persecution, even if that meant that brought him trials, then that's a picture of a healthy pastor. We, as a family of churches, have a partnership with the Ark Church in Dnipro, Ukraine. That church is led by Michael Ustinin, Ukrainian pastor, who was trained in our German Pastors College at the Ark Church in Hamburg, Germany. And after his training, that our own Jeff Purswell, the Dean of our Pastors College in the United States, helped train him. After his training, he was sent to plant the church in Dnipro, Ukraine. This was several years ago, not knowing that war would break out a year ago in Ukraine. And when war broke out and Russia attacked Ukraine, the guys in Hamburg, they contacted Michael and they said, would you like to evacuate? Would you like to get your family out? And he said, no. I'm staying right here. He willingly, as the text says, he willingly stayed there knowing that he was putting his life in danger. He actually had his wife and children leave for a time to protect them, but he stayed. And Michael talks about how people fleeing from the east, trying to get to the west, they make their way through Dnipro. The Ark Church has been designated as a Red Cross facility. They have 90 beds set up in their church building throughout the week. Of course, they take them down for the Sunday service because they regularly have at least 150 people every day that need someplace to sleep at night. So many of them have to sleep on the floor. They give them food. They give away at least 300 bags of groceries every week. They buy supplies that people need. And they share the gospel with people. People who have never heard of Jesus Christ. Several people have been born again and baptized before they either went to Poland, and this email I received from them this week, there were Ukrainian soldiers headed to Bakhmut, which is in the east, and one of them was born again, the commander of a troop of 20 men was born again because they slept there. And that commander went with his men, and they faced fierce opposition. They had to retreat. This commander, Dmitri, had his men retreat, and he stayed to protect them, and he was killed. Days before, he stopped in Dnipro, and he was born again. Because Michael willingly stayed. We're facing that in our day, aren't we? And by the way, thank you. The churches in the Asia-Pacific part of the world, and the Philippines I know in particular, you have given money. One of your churches gave me money this week. It was very moving for me and for Dave. Thank you for your financial support, because it goes right to Michael to help him continue the work of the gospel there. See, what he's saying, what Peter is saying here, not under compulsion, but willingly. Michael is doing that. Let me speak to the young men that are here, and you're thinking about pastoral ministry, or if you have young men in your churches, and you wonder if they're called or they're talking to you about pastoral ministry, you need to know this, and you need to tell them this if you're in your churches. Pastoral ministry in the years that lie ahead is going to be more challenging. You know this because our world is rapidly moving away from God's word. So you young men, and tell your young men this in your churches, you need to have conviction, and you need to have courage, and you need to have compassion. But I can say this, it is the most rewarding vocation. It is the most rewarding call to lay down your life for the church of God. And so if you believe that you're called as a pastor, talk to your pastor. That's the very first step. And you willingly and eagerly pursue that call. Okay, second, Peter says here, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. Says that in verse 2. Now we know from the teaching of Jesus Christ and in passages like Matthew 10 and throughout the pastoral epistles, Paul's epistles, that it is right, and we'll be very clear about this, it is right for pastors to be compensated by the church. Even to work full-time for the church. The church should be giving to support their pastors financially. At the same time, true elders are not to be lovers of money. That's the qualification in 1 Timothy 3:3, which is why that qualification is contrasted in Scripture with the false teachers who are greedy for money that Peter talks about in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 3. Therefore, it is shameful gain because the greed associated with false teachers are like the false shepherds that God condemns in Ezekiel 34. That's what Peter is talking about there. In contrast, a true elder is eager to shepherd and lead God's people, not to build personal wealth, but because he feels God calling him to serve them as a shepherd. And whatever that means in terms of provision, he can trust God with. The third exhortation there is not domineering those in your charge, but by being examples to the flock. That word domineering, it means to forcefully rule over. And it's marked by harshness. See, that kind of pastoral leadership is not to be associated with Jesus' shepherds. Because Jesus, he taught his apostles, and Peter was one of them who heard this teaching. He taught them how to use their God-given authority in Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 and 28. You know the rulers of the Gentiles. You know the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, pastors are not to use their God-given authority in a domineering way that serves themselves. However, rather, they are to be using their authority in a way that serves others, even at their own cost, because it reflects how Jesus used his power and authority. See, the example pastors are called to set to use their authority for the good of the church, that manner of leadership, it has influence in the church. When your people know that you're using your authority in a way that best serves them, that influences them. And that's the kind of leadership that people want to follow. That's why Peter is teaching this here. See, pastors are to be men of character who fulfill their responsibilities with integrity and in a way that represents how Jesus Christ laid down his life for the church. And by the way, let me speak to the secret weapons in this room again. Let me speak to pastors' wives. Your role in our lives, your role in your husband's life, to help us remain qualified as pastors is so important. We need you to speak truth to us. And I'm so grateful that I have a wife that does that. When I first became executive director in 2013, it was in May of 2013, I had to lead a pastor's conference in October or November of that year. I had never led a pastor's conference before. I didn't know what I was doing. I prayed. We as a leadership team planned it together. We prayed. We planned. We just were dependent upon God. Let's see how this is going to go. And so we did our pastor's conference, started on a Tuesday, ended on a Thursday. And on Thursday night, after the last session, Jill and I are one of the last people to walk out of the room, and we're holding hands and we're walking back to our hotel sleeping room together. And I just kind of said with this sigh, I think that went well. I think that went okay. And she looked at me and immediately said, "Don't let it go to your head." And I said, can we just rejoice here for just a moment? We just pulled off this pastor's conference. She said, "No, don't let that go to your head." And so that's a refrain now in our home. Don't let it go to your head. In fact, if she were sitting here and you came up and you encouraged me, "Oh, thank you, Pastor Mark, for your word," she would just lean over and say, "Don't let it go to your head." Why does she say that? Because she cares about the fact that she wants my ministry to give God glory. She knows that there's a potential that I can take credit for only what God should take credit for. And so I thank God for her and for her input in my life. So ladies, speak truth lovingly, but speak truth to your husband. It's so important. It's one of the reasons you are secret weapons in Sour Grace churches. What's the role of the senior pastor in building a qualified plurality? Beyond, obviously, character qualifications, there's also that be able to handle sound doctrine, be able to teach sound doctrine that all elders face. So a senior pastor's role is the overall responsibility for the theological development of your team, of your pastoral team. That means that you're reading something maybe together, or studying something together, or there are different pastors you ask to teach on a particular theological topic, so that as a team you're evolving and you're growing theologically. You want to have just regular training for the team. You also have overall responsibility for the care of the pastors and their wives. That doesn't mean that you have to do, as a senior pastor, all of the direct care and for a pastor and his wife, but you make sure that care is happening. And you're responsible for the overall evaluation of potential future elders. That's the role of the senior pastor. Okay, second mark of a healthy plurality. Number 2, a functional equality. So a qualified plurality. Number 2, a functional equality. Again, it's clear in the text that Peter isn't speaking to an individual elder, but to a team of elders because of the plural form there in verse 1. Additionally, in every church where we have evidence, not only in Scripture but church history, the leaders are all referred to by the same title. Elder, overseer, pastor, all hold the same office without any indication that one elder holds a different authority than the other. So it's equality in authority in that sense. Plurality is just a way, that word plurality is just a way to describe the biblical evidence that New Testament churches were led by more than one pastor. They were led by a team of pastors. And that's why Alexander Strauch says, on the local church level, the New Testament plainly witnesses to a consistent pattern of shared pastoral leadership. Therefore, leadership by a plurality of elders is a sound biblical practice. So, in the New Testament, there doesn't seem to be a hierarchy of authority among elders in any way. Rather, authority resides in the team as a whole. That's what you see in the New Testament. For example, in the book of Acts, we see a team of elders. The elders in Acts chapter 13, they make this decision together as the Holy Spirit leads them to send out Barnabas and Paul. That's a team decision. It wasn't made by one man. In Acts chapter 15, it says that the apostles and the elders together decided what was required of the Gentile believers. And so they wrote the letter and they sent it. Now, I use that word functional equality. So you get the equality, there's equal authority. I use the word functional equality because for an eldership to function in a healthy way, there must be humility among the elders. There must be mutual accountability among the elders. And there must be a shared responsibility among the elders. In other words, if you are a pastor who tends to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more passive, maybe you don't speak up or talk in elders' meetings, where you need to grow is to make sure that your voice is heard in an elders' meetings. However, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, and you're a pastor that talks a lot and you can dominate a conversation, you need to know when to talk and when to listen so that the entire eldership can function together. And that's why the senior pastor role is so important. This is where I find that teams need leadership, because it's the senior pastor who has the responsibility to study his team. Senior pastors, study your team and ensure that there's a functioning equality that's happening on your team. So what you do there is very, very important. You've got to call the passive to be more active. And the one, maybe with the stronger personality, more vocal, you've got to help him to know when to talk and when not to talk so that the entire team functions together. You are called as a senior pastor to make sure, with the help of the other guys, but make sure that your team is effective and efficient in moving forward together as a team. Third mark of a healthy plurality, a diverse plurality. A diverse plurality. Passages like 1 Corinthians 12 that you know, and Ephesians 4, they tell us that men who have different giftings and have different backgrounds and have different experiences will serve the church most effectively. Difference is not only in gifting, but also in perspective among elders. That is healthy. Elderships are healthy that way. That means we disagree some. It means we disagree, but that is healthy according to God's word. See, a senior pastor has the responsibility to build a team that allows men to share their diverse opinions. Now, we all have responsibility as elders to make sure that there's a functioning, diverse plurality. We have to build that culture, but the senior pastor has that responsibility in particular. And as we talk about decisions in the church, and as we disagree with one another, as we have to help each other work those out, it's the senior pastor that has to ensure that that is happening. And to do that, because we disagree on our eldership at times, to do that, it requires humility. It requires patience. It requires divine wisdom. It requires prayer. And I think it requires time. It takes time to build a culture on your team of elders where there's just an openness about, I can share my thoughts. It takes time. That's why a senior pastor has a unique role to intentionally create that kind of culture so that it becomes a strength on your team. So how do you do that? Take time, senior pastors, to celebrate the diversity on your team. Point out how different guys are gifted and how they're using that gifting to serve the church, and celebrate that. Encourage them. So celebrate different giftings on your team. When men share different perspectives, even if you don't agree with them, at least thank them for being forthright and honest to share their perspective, because that builds a healthy culture. Take responsibility to lead through discussion regarding how, and this is really important, I think, for senior pastors. Plan a conversation with your team to talk about what are you going to do when you disagree. And how do you go about making decisions when you disagree? See, it's better to try to figure that out when you're not disagreeing than when you find yourself in the midst of a disagreement, right? And that's helpful in marriage itself, I find. So, but let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. What kind of decisions on the team do you need complete agreement? And what kind of decisions do you don't need complete agreement? Just the majority of the team agrees. We've talked about this in our pastoral team, and we've had that happen. There have been times when, for example, I can think of a time when we were talking about an issue on the team, and I just didn't agree. I don't think even anybody else agreed with me. I think it was the lone voice. I don't think we should do this. And as I thought about the decision, it wasn't that essential. I was trying to remember what it was this morning. I don't remember what it was. So here's what I said to the team. Guys, you've heard my opinion. I disagree with this, but I'm clearly in the minority. And in my mind, this is not an essential decision, so I just trust you. And when I say that, it means that if I'm right and they're wrong, I have no right later to go back and say, hey, I told you so. I have no right. It means that when they make that decision and I say, I make that with you, it means I own that decision. And we own it together as a team. Because if I don't own it as a member of that team, the team can begin to fracture and the church notices. So that's what you have to talk about as a team. There can be larger decisions. I can think of one where most of the guys on our team wanted to ordain an elder. He thought he was ready for eldership. I personally didn't think he was ready for eldership. And I think there was another guy who was with me there. And so we talked a long time about it, and I was in the minority with one other guy. So I just said this, in my mind, this is an essential decision. It's not non-essential. This is essential about adding an elder to this team. Would you guys be willing to just pray about this for another month? And then we'll talk about it again. And the team was like, oh yeah, we can do that. And we prayed. And it was probably a few months later where I thought, I've seen enough change in this guy. And this guy's now an elder on our team who actually was sent out to plant a church. So that's how we've worked through it as a pastoral team. You've got to have non-essential decisions and essential decisions, which means there are non-essential decisions. You don't need consensus, meaning you don't need unanimity. But there are other decisions where you may need unanimity, like adding an elder to the team. And what we did as an eldership is we decided to write this down. We wrote our team affirmations, and we wrote 7 affirmations. We say, I affirm the value of devotion by remembering that my identity is in Christ and not my ministry. We want to be those kind of men. Number 2, I affirm the value of humility by encouraging the men around me to help me assess my strengths and weaknesses, both in character and gifting, and to place me best on the team where I will best serve the church. I affirm the value of honesty by committing to sharing my opinions and struggles with the team openly with the team. We have to be honest with one another. Number 4, I affirm the value of integrity by taking responsibility to open my life and my family to evaluation and care. We don't want anything hidden on our team. Number 5, I affirm the value of accountability by committing to lay my